The stars are climbing over the dark hills of old Thera, and the waves are slow and steady tonight, like the world's own breath. Let the day slip away now. Let your eyelids grow heavy. Let your mind drift like petals on the Aegean. See, this is a tale from long ago, from a time when maps were not yet drawn, when gods still strode among whispers, and the sea remembered every word. It starts in a secluded cove cut into the volcanic rock of Thera, which is today's Santorini. There, secluded among broken stone and wild fig trees, was a fishing village so tiny it did not have a name. They just called it ***** Bay. ****, it was an island of salt and breeze, of rope nets and whispered prayers to the sea. And in this village dwelt a girl called Thalassa, which, in the ancient language, was the sea. She was not an ordinary child. She was born under a night of peculiar tides and blue lightning, when the sea came up higher than the cliff tops and bellowed in a sound that nobody could interpret. Her mother, who wove nets, said that the sea had sung her child's name before she ever opened her eyes. Her fisherman father told her that she was part wild, part wind, and part wave. Thalassa developed like the tide, unobtrusively, steadily, and with secrets. She spent her days gazing toward the horizon, speaking softly to dolphins, and leaving gifts of olive branches on the edge of the tide. She slept in a hammock fashioned from her father's worn sails at night, dreaming of abandoned islands and whispers from below. But the oddest thing of all was this. The sea replied. It started when she was just 5 years old. One morning, she waded into the waves to pick up a floating shell. The waves washed at her ankles, and she said, very softly, "Thank you." The water quieted. Then one ripple came to her, slow and calm. A voice not of air or human voice, but deeper, filled her mind with music under the surface. "You are heard." From then on, Thalassa would sit beside the rocks and listen. Occasionally she would sing to the sea, and the sea would reward her with silver fish. Occasionally she would question it, and the waves would mount up or quiet. In response, she never spoke of it to anyone, not really, not the whole truth. The villagers already referred to her as Thalassateknin, child of the sea. They said it fondly, yes, but with an edge of fear. Old Moria, the healer, once grumbled that the gods knot their riddles on odd children, and travelers who came through commented that she had eyes like sea glass, clear, far away, and full of things that hadn't yet occurred. But Thalassa, she just smiled. She knew that the sea had secrets, and she was one of them. When she was 12 years old, all changed. That spring, there was a new wind from the east. It appeared out of nowhere, curling into the bay with an odd smell. Not salt, not smoke, but memory. The villagers could feel it in their bones. The goats wouldn't climb the rocks. The fish disappeared from the nets. And what of Thalassa? She started dreaming in words she had never spoken. Underwater, in her dreams, she strolled through ruin palaces. She listened to the singing of coral towers and beheld statues whose eyes shed pearl tears. Once, she woke up in a gasp, her heart pounding like thunder. Atlantis, she breathed. The name was like ash and honey. The following morning, she traced the coastline past the village. Her naked feet kissed the beach, then the rocks, then the cool lip of tide pools. She climbed beyond the furthermost spot any child was permitted, where the cliffs fell steep into the deep blue unknown. And there she discovered it. A cave, one she had never known, though she had traversed that shoreline 100 times. Its mouth was hidden behind hanging vines and stone worn smooth by thousands of tides. Inside, the air was damp and humming. The walls glittered with ancient quartz, and in the deepest part of the cave, water pooled, black and still. She stepped closer, and the sea spoke again. Asterisk, you have returned. The voice was not just around her, it was inside her, like a memory she had long forgotten she bore. Asterisk, why am I here? She demanded out loud. The water distorted. Its surface rippled, and shapes began to emerge, not reflections, but visions. She saw a city, white and towering, composed of marble and light, suspended above the waves. She saw a temple with columns of seashells and runes which glowed on its floor, and she saw herself standing in front of an altar made of water, grasping something in her hand, a conch shell, shining gold, and singing. Asterisk, you are. The last echo, greater than the sea, remembers what the land forgets. Asterisk, Thalassa knelt down. Her fingers brushed against the pool's surface, and the water was warm like a breath. Tell me everything, she breathed. But the sea is old. It does not tell everything at once. That evening, she came home quietly. Her parents uttered no words. They noticed the transformation in her. Her eyes had darkened the color of profound tide, her voice softer, her pace more sluggish. And for the first time, the village bells tolled on no wind. Something had started. Yes, let's slip further into the tides of time. The following days blurred like mist on the water. Thalassa no longer played among the fig trees or repaired nets by her mother. Instead, she wandered, always towards the cliffs, always towards the secret cave. Asterisk, every time she went in, it seemed the sea had been waiting. No crashing waves, no wind, only silence, and the thrum of something timeless. Just beneath, within the cavern, time lost speed. The air was crisp and had the scent of damp stone and lost rain. The shallow pool glowed softly, even in the dark, and every ripple shone as though it held a thought within. When Thalassa dipped her fingers into the water, visions unfolded. One day she saw a line of veiled women walking into the sea, each carrying a bowl of light. Another, she saw silver and stone giant fish swimming through underwater arches bigger than any village temple. Then there were visions of a fire, a fearful light that engulfed cities and destroyed them, and towers sinking beneath waves. Rising up, greater than asterisk, what are these? She whispered. Memories, the sea answered. Asterisk, but not yours, not yet. Each evening, she came back to her family quiet, but full. Her dreams weren't her own anymore. She dreamed in tongues she didn't know, and she awakened with her palms buzzing, as if she'd been holding something that had lived a long, long time. Her parents regarded her with concern, but also wonder. She's becoming something else. Her father overheard her mother whisper to him one evening, something not entirely ours. I know, he said. The sea gave her to us, and now it's recalling her. One evening, around sunset, Thalassa discovered the cave was darker than ever before. The radiant quartz that lined the walls glowed faintly. The water, smooth before, was vibrating, and for the first time, the voice that always greeted her was mute. She waited, breath caught. Then, gently, a sound anew. Footsteps, not behind her, not on the beach, from inside the cave. She spun, and through the thin shades stepped a figure wrapped in sea robes. Their visage covered with woven net. They moved barefoot, silent, as if they were part of the cave itself. Thalassa remained firm, "Who are you?" she demanded. The figure raised her head. A low, smooth woman's voice spoke. "I am one who remembers, like you." Her name was Delphenia, a name lost to land, but sung still in currents. She said that once she had been the oracle of the deep temple, long before the land above had known Thera by name. "How is that possible?" Thalassa asked. "You live," Delphenia smiled. "Not as you know it." She told of a day when the sea was said to have temples more profound than any mountain, constructed not by hand, but by storms and song. There were voices, then, not gods, not men, that dwelled within the water, rode with it, and carried memory on the breath of wind through reeds. "You are a daughter of the song," said Delphenia. "You are not the first, but perhaps you are the last." Then she dipped her hand into the water and pulled out a shell, not any shell, but one scored with spirals of ancient times and veined in gold. "Put this to your ear, and you will hear more than sound," she told him. Thalassa did. It throbbed softly in her hand, a heartbeat of tide. She clasped it tight, and the world shifted. Pillars of coral swirled around her, turned into shapes both familiar and alien. Water lay under her feet, but she did not drown. Voices arose like wind chimes, a murmur of memory, not of words. Asterisk greater than "Who are you?" The voices asked. I am Thalassa. Why have you come to find us? To learn what was forgotten, to say what was silenced." The chorus faltered, and like a wave crashing. "Greater than then you will recall Atlantis." The world turned over again. She saw a city of salt and mirrors emerging from a still bay. Ships of unimaginable loveliness floated on aquamarine seas. Children sang on high terraces, with dolphins as priests in robes made of star-string cast nets into the air. And then something snapped. A shadow rent the sea. A curse, a weapon. Thalassa witnessed a gulf rip apart the sea floor. Blazing fire spewed up. Skyscrapers collapsed. The city screamed, not with terror, but in song, one final hymn, which reverberated through all the waves. And then, nothing greater than what did happen. She gasped. The sea remembers. The land chose to forget. Greater than why make me see this? Greater than because you are the voice, the sea answered. The voice of what? Of what sleeps, of what waits. The vision disappeared suddenly. Thalassa staggered back into the cave, the shell dropping. From her ear, Delphenia was nowhere. Only the cave and the gentle shaking of the pool existed. She gripped the shell firmly. She was no longer Thalassa, the village girl. She was a memory made that night. The sea did not sleep. It breathed to the beach, pulled at fishermen's lines, and whined along the cliff face like a voice too far away. Even the dogs of the village slept quietly, their ears perked up in the direction of the tide. Thalassa sat up, holding the shell in her palms. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The shell throbbed gently, and within it, she sensed the beat of the deep, an ancient heart still pulsating beneath the seafloor. The visions had transformed her, not only in spirit, but in skin and sense. She heard gulls at a distance before. They cried. She felt the weather moods in her bones. And most of all, she could no longer resist being away from the sea for long. The villagers saw. They observed her in silent wonder, speaking softly that the gods had stamped her, or maybe reclaimed her. Some brought gifts to her family's door. Slick rocks, dried lavender, coral bits formed in spiral shape. No one spoke of why, but everybody felt it. Something ancient had come back by way of her, and the sea was paying attention. A couple of days after that, Thalassa woke up with salt on her skin and sand in her hair. She hadn't been to the cave that evening, yet she'd dreamed about it once more. But this time, she hadn't been alone. There was a boy there. He was not much older than she, with skin sun-browned and eyes the grey-white of storm clouds. His apparel was bizarre, not fabric, but folded in flowing curves like water. He had a thin strip of silver on his brow, crescent-shaped. In the dream, they stood together at the entrance of a fallen temple under the sea. They did not speak, but she knew him. "You are not from now," she had breathed, and he had smiled. Asterisk, neither are you. That morning, the sky was weighed down by a silver light, the sort that makes the sea a mirror. Thalassa came back to the cave, the shell swaddled in cloth. When she got there, the air already hummed with that still murmur again, half sung like a lullaby. The pool was quieter than she had ever known. She knelt and lowered the shell into the water gently. It sank, but slowly, twirling like a falling star. And then the water parted. It did not splash or erupt. It merely opened, showing a winding stair of sleek stone leading down into blue-green glow. Thalassa stood frozen. "It is time," the cave whispered. Without hesitation, she stepped in. Her naked feet found the first step, warm, not chill, and with every step, the sea glimmered aside for her, allowing passage. Down she descended, not drowning, not wet, just going down as through a dream made of tide and breath. Below, visions danced in the waves around her, silky to the touch, shining dimly, children suspended over gardens of coral, elders laying scrolls in crystal caskets, scribes painting glyphs onto live shells, priestesses summoning dolphins with pearl bells. Atlantis, not legend, a recollection. And then, at the stair's end, she appeared. A vast hall unfolded before her, half abandoned, half glowing. Its pillars twisted like nautilus shells, and its floor flexed like glass, catching not only her picture, but her essence, dreams, terrors, names she had never uttered. At the center stood a dais of coral, and upon it a figure. The boy, just as he had been in her dream. He turned and looked at her, eyes dark with ancient knowledge. "You've returned," he said softly. She took a step forward. "I don't remember being here before." He smiled, greater than, but the sea does. They stood there for a time in silence. The air around them throbbed like a heartbeat, soft, slow, unyielding. "What's this place?" Thalassa asked at last. "The archive," he replied. "The last gasp of Atlantis." She gazed at the walls. They shimmered, filled with pictures and signs that changed slowly, as if written on silken sand. "Why me?" "Because you were born with tide. Because the sea chose you. Because memory needs voice." He strode to the dais and extended his hand. "Will you see?" She hesitated, then put her hand into his and stepped out of the room with him, and the room dissolved. She was flying now, not in air, but through time. She beheld the first temples growing up out of coral reefs, cities that floated and breathed. She beheld philosophers inscribing questions into waves, warriors who fought with waves, artists who colored the sea with starlight. And then there came envy. Other countries, other monarchs. They saw what Atlantis possessed, and they desired it. They attempted to claim it. But Atlantis was safeguarded, not by forts, but by the pact, a vow between land and sea, between the people of the tides and the deep ones beneath. But the agreement had been violated. A priest had betrayed the temple. He had desired power to control the storms rather than serve them, and the sea, in sorrow and rage, reclaimed that which it had given. The cities were dragged beneath, the archives were closed, the oracles were stilled, only pieces remained, buried in dreams, in caves, in songs the waves sang, until today. Thalassa woke up on the cave ground. The shell rested next to her, pulsating softly, warm. Outside, the tide had increased, but something was not as it was. The sea was no longer whispering. It was waiting, of course. Let the tide draw you deeper into the depths. That night, the horizon ran gold and fire. The villagers had stood quietly along the beach, staring out at the sea with subdued awe. No one had spoken of it out loud, but all of them could feel the change. The wind had shifted. The tide had shifted. The girl with salt in her hair was no longer simply one of their own. She moved among them like a figure remembered, half forgotten from a dream. Her father attempted to catch her eyes. Her mother clutched a wreath of rosemary and olive branches, fingers shaking. Thalassa bent to them both, her forehead lightly against theirs. She would not bid farewell, for where she was headed, there were no words for leaving. That evening, during the first full moon of the year, she returned to the cave one final time. The shell throbbed by itself now, vivid enough to cast shadows on the stone walls. The pool churned gently, as if it was excited, as if it was awake. Delphinia waited. This time, the veil was no longer about her face. Her face was etched with lines of salt and time, but her eyes contained the boundless serenity of a tide that had witnessed the rise and fall of centuries. "You are ready," she said. "For what?" Thalassa whispered. "To remember." Delphinia dropped to one knee by the pool and set a shard of crystal on the surface. Light flowed upward, a cone of sound and vision. "This is the pact," she said, and Thalassa remembered it all. Long ago, before the world made maps, before kings etched borders, there was just the sea, the sky, and the listeners. The people of the tides were not Atlanteans yet. They dwelled with the water, not over it. They constructed spirals, not cities. They sang rather than ruled. Then the deep ones arrived, not beasts, not deities, not even whole apart. They were creatures of current and recollection, tide and song, minds so vast they spoke only in feeling, in rhythm. They brought a gift, knowledge in return for remembrance. The pact was conceived. As payment for guarding the memory of the sea, the people were given visions, long life, and agreement with the water. They stored no scrolls, no stones. Their past dwelled in waves, and in the select few who could listen to them, but the centuries slipped away, greed oozed in like decay. And one voice, a great oracle, loved by many, became restless. Why must we serve what we could control? He went too deep. He sought the deep one's secrets, but in addition, he demanded power, mastery, and they denied him. With rage, he broke the pact with consecrated crystal to resound commands into the sea, curving it, distorting it. The ocean wailed. Atlantis climbed too high, and the tide responded. The cities sank. The songs ceased. The pact drowned. But there was still a vow. One would return. One would remember. Greater than you are. The echo of that promise, Delphinia said. Thalassa did not speak. Tears pricked in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of recognition. Every vision, every dream, every whisper in the tide. They had been calling her home. "What must I do?" she asked. Delphinia opened her hand and pressed something into her palm. A stone, spiraled in shape, softly glowing from the inside. It pulsed once, twice, then fell into a gentle rhythm. "Take this to where the pact was originally sealed. Return it, greater than where's that, greater than deep beneath, below even the archive, below the trench of silence." Thalassa's breath caught. Each sailor knew of the trench, an immense slash in the ocean floor, miles out from land. Nothing came back from below. No net, no diver, no dream. "How will I live?" she breathed. "You belong to the sea now," Delphinia told her, stroking a hand down her cheek. "It won't drown what is its own." At sunrise, Thalassa stood at the bow of a borrowed fishing boat, alone, dressed in robes of sea thread and memory. The village gazed at her from the cliffs, silently. When she slid off into the sea, the wind settled. The gulls fell silent. Even the waves bent in reverence. She sailed for the spot where maps ended, where stories faded to silence, where the sea waited, with open arms. She travelled 3 days and 3 nights. No sun, no stars, only the spiral stone to lead her, softly glowing, drawing her forward like a pulse deep in the water. Then, when the boat floated into a calm too great for consideration, she saw it. The sea grew dark, not black, but like the ink of a long-lost scroll. The ocean fell away beneath her, down the trench of silence. She picked up the stone, held it against her heart, and walked into the water. She did not sink. She descended as if borne, faster than falling, but weightless. Bubbles wrapped around her like silver vines. Pressure should have crushed her, cold should have bitten, but it didn't. She felt calm. 1,000 voices swept her mind, not words, but songs, choral breathing. At the bottom, a light waited. A great door, silt half over, spirals and moons etched into it and the outline of a shell. She set the stone into its center. It was a snug fit, and the door creaked open. Within was not devastation. It was a temple of remembrance. Thousands of glyphs danced along the walls, moving ever so slowly. They did not remain still. They breathed, recounting and recounting the tale of the pact, of Atlantis, of the treachery. Thalassa made her way to the center, where one chalice remained of clear crystal, filled with water that shone with each color of the sea. She poured the stone into it. The water radiated, and then the song was back. A wave of sound, deep and warm, swept through the temple, through her, like the tide recalling its name. The pact was made whole, and Thalassa was no longer a girl. She was the sea's voice. She didn't recall the climb, only that she was being lifted, eyes wide, halfway between quiet and air. The sea had handled her like a child, swept her up, not as before, on its salt hungers and curiosities, but now reverently, as a choir raises a final chord into a vaulted roof. When Thalassa finally surfaced, the moon welcomed her. It floated low and bloated, like a guardian brooding over the tides. She breathed, and the sea breathed with her. The boat was vanished. Not broken, not submerged, merely missing, as if it had never been. But she did not fright. She turned slowly in the water, and as she moved, the sea wrapped itself around her, buoying her up until her feet stood on the waves. Yes, stood. The water had created a platform, shining, glass-like, not solid, not liquid. It rocked gently on the tide, but supported her weight like glass. Above, stars opened their eyes one by one, until the entire sky leaned in closer, and that's when the voices started. Not loud, not sharp. They were faraway echoes, gentle calls. Murmurs carried on the horizon. She has returned. The voice walks again. Greater than the pact is remembered. They weren't in Greek or any language she spoke. They were in tide, a language of tug and quiet, of rhythm and breath, and she knew them. She was no longer just Thalassa from the village. She was something older, something recalled. The sea started to shift. It drew back from the shores of all neighboring lands, not forcibly, but with intent, showing the remnants of old harbors, roads once buried under centuries of coral and silt. Waters parted upon the beaches of lost islands and hushed temples along the shorelines. One of them drifted to Delos, another to the broken foundation of Atlantis, now slightly above the bottom, shrouded in mist. Another curved east, towards where Phoenicians once whispered 2 stars. The sea was telling truth, and truth had weight. She walked for hours. Waves followed her footsteps. Where she stepped, the water became calm. Fish trailed after her like silver birds. Lantern jelly floated dreamily around her, their light dim and pious. In her hand, the spiral stone throbbed again, not strong, but constant, a compass for memory. Her destination was not a place, it was a wound. Long before dawn, she came to an island no one remembered. It had no name anymore. On maps, it was merely rock. Locals shunned it, speaking in hushed tones of curses and sea witches. But as Thalassa touched land, the air shifted. The aroma of wild thyme, olive bark, and faraway lightning reached her nostrils. She knelt and put her hand on the earth. Was warm. In the center of the island, surrounded by broken marble columns and shattered amphorae, was a flat stone, black and smooth, curved like a giant circle. The echo table. She recognized it at once. This was where the ancient oracles had listened to the sea and communicated her truths. This was where the ultimate betrayal had been whispered into the waves. Here, the wound still bled. She laid her hand on the table, and the world shuddered, not brutally, not with earthquake or flame, but with memory. Visions unfolded around her, not from the air, but from the water in the cracks of the rock. They rose like ghosts from deep caverns. She saw the old oracle, young, once, proud, starving for something more than the sea would provide. We should be masters, not servants, he whispered. He had employed the spiral stone, not to hear, but to command. He'd coerced the waters to inundate opposition shores, sent fleets down with mere sound. He described it balance. The sea described it betrayal, and in retribution it turned aside. The pact was broken. The tides fell quiet, and the remembrance of that quiet endured. Thalassa now stood at the center of that echo, but she did not speak. She sang a low, quivering tune, not from her throat, but deeper, older. She sang of the sea for kings, before scrolls. She sang of coral cities, and voices that shivered like moonlight. She sang of sorrow and of forgiveness. The stone beneath her started to shine, not with flames, but with quiet, and then it sang back. Not words, not pictures, but one great note, low and ageless, like a whale's prayer. The sea was listening once more. On the horizon's edge, clouds gathered, not tempestuous, not enraged, but laden with something holy. Rain fell, but not common rain. It was warm. It had the scent of hidden caverns and drowned gardens. Every drop held a glow, like pearls melting into mist. Where the rain fell, memory came back. Ships long believed lost came blinking into sight, intact once more, gliding silently with sails of gold. Statues swallowed by sand so many years before now stood again, swathed in barnacles, but unshed end down beneath the waves, where no diver ever dared to swim. Voices lifted in song once more, and in that instant Thalassa knew the sea had not forgiven simply. It had chosen her. It made her its bridge, its tale, its watch. She knelt upon the echo table while the rain fell in rippling halos about her, and she whispered, "I will remember." Fishermen on the mainland woke to nets full of fish not seen in generations. Tides had returned to their rhythms. Weather softened. Even the stones at the edge of the water seemed smoother, softer. And on the wind, from far distant, there came a song, soft, ancient, a lullaby of tides. Of course, let the tide pull us deeper still. Sleep fell across the world like a fine mist that morning. Villagers by the coast, traders on their journeys, even the restless winds, all slowed, as if the world itself drew breath it had long forgotten. No storm, no warning, only a weightless hush, a sort of reverence. And in the middle of it all stood Thalassa, quiet and still on the stone table of the nameless island. Her dress soaked with sacred rain, her hair tousled by the breath of the sea. But her mind drifted like kelp in a gentle current, for she had seen things, heard things, and become something she could no longer name. The spiral stone, its warmth enveloping her palm, throbbed gently, not to push, not to caution, but merely to confirm. Asterisk, you remain linked, you remain chosen. Asterisk, with that link, though came duty. Thalassa looked about to the cracked columns that surrounded the echo table. Each one was carved into, smoothed almost to invisibility by passage of time and tides, but still readable if caressed lightly. She approached one of them, tracing her fingers along etched marble. A tide of understanding swelled up behind her eyes. They were more than symbols. They were records, poems inscribed in the lost language of Pelagia, the tongue of the sea's first devotes, not quite Greek, not quite song, but halfway between poetry and water. She closed her eyes and felt the meaning flow around her. To those who hear, the sea speaks truth. To those who order, the sea imposes silence. That quote alone had described the downfall of the first oracle. He had not heard, he had commanded, and yet in commanding, he had disrupted the ancient balance. But Thalassa had not commanded the sea to speak. She had sung to it. Somewhere further down the column, another phrase glimmered into meaning. 3 tides watch over the ocean's core, greater than the tide of memory, greater than the tide of grief, and the tide of becoming. All 3, a passage, a test, a present. The rain that had come before, that holy rain, it had been the first tide. The tide of memory. It had revealed the ancient betrayal, stirred up forgotten spaces, and reclaimed what had been lost. 2 tides left, and her odyssey, she now realized, was far from finished. From the bottom of the echo table, a thin trail existed, not cut by human tools, but cultivated from pliant seagrass, shimmering in the morning dew. It bent eastward, towards the island of bones, a place of whispers only, where statues sobbed and temples shook, where the silence of Poseidon still lingered within the rocks. She had grown up with stories of it, cautionary tales. In fact, mariners told of marble statues half submerged in the cliffs, their eyes empty, their mouths open. Some claimed the island was once a city, laid waste by the fury of heaven. Others spoke in hushed tones of it as a dungeon for voices too dangerous to utter. But the spiral stone heated once more in her palm, nodding in that direction with an unchanging beat as the heart beckons to its lost rhythm. Thalassa exhaled, not with fear, but with awe, and she travelled. The trip took 2 days, not due to distance, but because the road wound through realms where time bent and reality faltered. At one point, she passed through a forest of kelp that grew not in water, but in air. Long emerald ribbons swayed from invisible roots, brushing her cheeks with whispers. In another, she crossed a dry riverbed made entirely of petrified coral, its ridges humming softly beneath her steps. And always, at her side, the sea, never more than a whisper away. On the 3rd morning, the island of bones appeared on the horizon. It thrust itself upwards from the sea, a tooth of white marble and shale, splintered and jagged, covered in mist. It was lifeless looking from afar. As she drew near, the finer details came into focus. Statues, dozens, perhaps hundreds, stood along the cliffs and groups near the water's edge. Some were tall, robed statues with splintered staffs. Some were twisted into fetal positions, faces hidden in stone hands. Some looked up in mute sorrow, as if forever waiting for a god to answer. None of them were intact. Each of them wore cracks, missing arms, or broken faces, and all cried. Tears of salt slicked the marble cheeks. Thalassa walked onto the island's shore barefoot, and as soon as her skin made contact with the ground, a vibration coursed through her spine, a sigh, low and ancient, reminiscent of the one the sea had made when she sang for the first time. But this one wasn't the same. It didn't emanate from the ocean, but from below the island. In the center of the island was a shattered temple, its pillars cracked, its ceiling collapsed, but its altar intact. On it lay one statue, a woman, clothed, with one hand across her heart and the other pointing toward the sea. She didn't weep like the rest. Her lips were instead slightly ajar, as if in mid-spell. Thalassa walked up to her with slow piety. As she approached, she noticed something cradled in the statue's upturned hand, a stone bowl, containing a transparent liquid which glimmered like starlight. She realized at once this was the tide of grief. To finish the next section, she would need to drink, not with her body, but with her soul. She knelt, whispered gratitude, and leaned forward. The liquid caressed her lips, and the world fell silent. Instantly, she was elsewhere. A city of white towers and singing, domes, children at play in marble fountains, scholars arguing under fig trees, sailors drawing constellations from memory. It was beautiful, alive. But then a sound, a roar, a command, a breaking. The spiral stone in someone else's hand. A man with gold eyes and fire in his voice. You will obey, the sea is mine, to shape, and the city cracked, flooded, lost, a tide not born of grief, but of arrogance. Thalassa wept as she watched, not for the people though, but for the sea, forced into violence, twisted into vengeance. She reached for one of the children in the vision, a girl not unlike herself, but her hand passed through like mist. This is not to change, the spiral whispered, only to carry. She nodded, and when the vision passed, her tears had become pearls, soft and weightless, dissolving into the wind. The second tide was complete, and now only one was left. The tide of becoming, of course. Get comfortable. Let the waves transport you forward gently. It was almost twilight when Thalassa descended from the altar of the morning island. The sky blazed with peaches and lavenders, and the wind drifted as if a memory, light, tentative, uncertain whether to pursue the day or retreat to the creases of night. The statues that stood along the cliffs now didn't feel like relics at all, but rather witnesses, silent sentinels of what she'd just witnessed, and what she was now. She'd weathered 2 tides. Memory had revealed to her truth forgotten by time. Grief had etched on her heart the burden of the sea's sadness. And now the last passage, the tide of becoming, but where it would be born, she yet did not know. The spiral stone beat gently in her hand. It no longer pointed, no longer led. Rather, it had fallen silent, not lifeless, but attentive, waiting, believing her. To take steps forward now, no longer a pilgrim, but a carrier. So Thalassa obeyed instinct. She moved west, to where the sun dipped below the horizon, shooting long fingers of gold across the water. She traversed thin bridges of salt and coral, moved through veils of sea fog that glimmered like silk, until she reached a cove she'd never seen but somehow recognized. There was no temple there, no columns, no statues, only water, bright, impossibly calm, and formed like an exact mirror, one that didn't just mirror her face, but her soul. The air was quiet, and the sea in front of her appeared as if holding its breath. And then a voice, not from the wind, not from the waves, but from within, greater than, *, you are ready. The voice was hers, and not hers. It reverberated through her mind's layers, like the surf through sea caverns, deep, soft, forever. She knelt on the water's rim and looked into the mirror. Her eyes looked back, but there was something that glimmered behind them now, a blue knowing that ran deep, a stillness that was a storm. Then the reflection shifted. She saw her mother, knitting nets along the beach, singing lullabies to the waves. She beheld her father, stern and silent, instructing her to hear the wind, not pursue it. She beheld her village, simple, loving, imperfect. She beheld herself as she once was, curious, restless, adrift. And lastly, she beheld the sea, not as an object, but as a being, a great, sleeping dream, watching, waiting, yearning to be heard, not manipulated. Then the reflection disappeared, and the voice reappeared. The sea is not a god, nor a servant. It is memory, grief, and becoming. Those who seek to command it break, but those who listen to it shape the world. Thalassa shut her eyes. The last tide. It wasn't something to drink or behold. It was something to become. And so she stood, raised the spiral stone to her lips, and sang no song, no lyrics, only sound, low and gentle, rising with the breath like mist on morning seas. Her voice blended into the wind, curled into the foam, shivered across the surface of the mirror-bright cove. And the sea reacted, not with roar, but with quiet. It listened, and it replied. The water in front of her started to ripple, not outward, as one might expect, but inward, like a spiral building from the perimeter toward the center. Within that center, a form arose, pale, see-through. Familiar, it was herself. not a reflection, but a form composed of water and recollection. Her sea self emerged and joined her body, and Thalassa became. The instant was not boisterous. It did not burst or glow, but within her everything reoriented. She heard the layers of the ocean, the groans of deep trenches, the coral reef's laughter, the heartbeats of whales below the waves. She felt the sea's memories coursing through her veins, ships wrecked in storms, sunken cities, lullabies from 1,000 shores. She was no longer merely a girl. She was the voice of the sea, not the master, not the servant, the singer. When she opened her eyes, the spiral stone had vanished. In its stead, lying in her hand, was a shell unlike any she had ever beheld, silvery, ridged, with a soft sheen of pulsing light at its core. It did not talk, but it vibrated with eternal patience. A container, a reminder, a vow. Thalassa stood on the lip of the shore and gazed out at the horizon. She knew she could never go back to her village in the same way. But that was never. The intention, her journey was not about going back. It was about carrying the truths history had forgotten, carrying the songs of drowned cities, carrying the grief of the sea and its hope, not in scrolls or stories, but in being. Behind her, the wind shifted. Gentle waves lapped the cove's edge, and as she stepped into the shallows, she whispered one final phrase, not to the sea, but to the listener. To you, greater than asterisk, may you always hear what the sea is trying to say. Indeed, relax back in. Let the silence of the waves calm you deeper. The stars twinkled like forgotten melodies up in the sky, a note from the ancient songs of the earth. The sea, now peaceful and attentive, lapped softly against Thalassa's ankles as she emerged from the holy cove and onto a gleaming path of sea glass and white sand. She had no idea where it would go, but her feet had moved not with uncertainty, but with asterisk faith. Asterisk, asterisk. The world had not shifted, not externally. The gulls continued to mourn softly above the cliffs. The wind continued to gently stroke the olive branches along the coast, but she was different, in ways both sweeping and imperceptible. Her heart no longer pulsed its own beat. It had found a new rhythm, synchronized with the tide. She had become the voice. As the road crept up a hillside, Thalassa came to a peaceful plateau above the great expanse of Aegean below. There, a circle of standing stone markers stood, old and half-hidden, as though the earth had attempted to forget them. But the sea did not forget. She sat in the center of the ring and shut her eyes, and she listened. The warm stone shell in her palm fluttered faintly, then throbbed like breathing, and the world around her changed. She sat in the same circle, but it was no longer night. It was twilight, everlasting twilight. The grass glistened with stardust. The wind hummed with gentle voices. The sea below shone silver blue, extended beyond any horizon. She had entered the shore between worlds. This was where oracles strode. In dreams, where sea memories floated like clouds, and truth was not found in reason or evidence, but feeling. And before her stood a figure in water and light. It was not a god, not a ghost, not even human. It was a memory encased in form, the ancient sea oracle, Erythra. She did not speak with words, but in thoughts that undulated like waves across Thalassa's breast. Asterisk, you bear the voice now. I am but echo. What was softly spoken in darkness now sings in you. Asterisk, Thalassa's throat constricted, not from fear, but wonder. She had heard of Erythra only in whispers, a dream seer who had lived once on Delos, speaking only during the sleep of the world, a prophetess who heard not gods but the sea. And now here she was, or what was left of her, a glimmer of knowledge. Erythra reached out, not with hands, but with memory, and Thalassa saw them, suddenly. Asterisk all the other girls before. Her asterisk a chain that reaches back across centuries. Dreamers, singers, listeners. Some had existed as priestesses, others as vagabonds. Some had been feared, others forgotten. All, however, had heard the sea. All had spoken to it. And now she was the next in line. Greater than the sea remembers all that the world forgets, said Erythra, her voice like mist through tall reeds. Asterisk, but it cannot speak unless someone chooses to listen. You have chosen. Will you take its memory back into the waking world? Thalassa nodded, not with pride, but with peace. The kind of peace which does not shout, but lasts. The stars shone brighter above the silver sea, and one after another, the visions of former listeners, the dreamers and girls and women who had preceded her, emerged out of the darkness about her. They did not bow or speak. They simply stood, with her, not above, not behind, but beside, a chorus of quiet strength. Erythra's shape started to disappear. Her last thought was a benediction, as gentle as sea foam. Asterisk, may your voice be borne by every tide. May the ones who sleep awake. May your song never be stilled. Asterisk, the light grew dim. The wind shifted. And Thalassa awakened in the actual world once more. The plateau was still, but not vacant. In the ground in front of her, a new stone had manifested, smooth, warm, with a carving in an ancient language. She couldn't read it with her eyes, but her heart knew. Greater than asterisk, she who remembers the sea. Thalassa stood slowly. The way ahead was clear. She would go back to her village, to her people, not to explain, but to be, to speak the sea's song in a world too long afraid of stillness, to whisper to those who had forgotten how to hear. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the sea listened, ready to rise once more. Morning crept in quietly. The sun didn't blaze, but softly poured gold over the far hills, producing soft glows. On the village rooftops, olive trees glimmered in the light, their silver-green leaves whispering like a lullaby slowly coming to life. Thalassa stood at the threshold of home. The twisting path she'd trudged as a child now seemed diminutive, not because the stones had shifted, but because she had. The spiral shell vibrated softly in her palm, not loudly, not incessantly, but persistently, a quiet reminder. She had come back, and the sea had returned with her. The village woke slowly. A handful of fishermen readied their boats. Goats cried lazily behind low dry stone walls. The baker's hearth exhaled warm air filled with rosemary and crushed wheat. Familiar noises, familiar aromas. But the crowd was silent as she passed among them, not of fear, but wonder. They had watched her depart with question in her eyes. Now she had come back with answers in her silence. An elderly woman stood by the well, watching. She did not speak, but lifted a hand to her breast and nodded. Her eyes were shining, as though she, too, recalled the sea's song so long ago. Children trailed her at arm's length, speaking softly as in a temple, and in the plaza an impromptu group formed, not arranged, not summoned. It just happened as if the tide had swept them in. Thalassa walked onto the weathered stone dais at the center of the village. This was where adventurers used to sing songs and traders spoke of faraway places. She spoke not loudly. She just closed her eyes, put the shell tenderly against her heart, and started talking. Not loudly, but really. She talked of tides remembering lost cities, of caves where gods had whispered their apologies, of islands mourning their lost names, of the sea as a soul, old, gentle, hurt, waiting. Her voice was low, soft, but every ear heard. Because she was not performing, she was becoming. Some wept, not because they knew all her words, but because something within them recognized what she had said, something deep, something long buried under years of noise and fear, and now, like a pearl in silt, beginning to rise again. Standing in the crowd was her father. He did not say a word, but for the first time in many seasons, his shoulders were no longer weighed down. He did not look at her, but looked through her to something far beyond, something shining. Then he nodded once and went away, back to the shore, to listen. That night, the sea became glass still, not because it rested, but because it waited, for the first time in 1,000 tides. Someone had spoken its truth out loud, and the sea, ever patient, started to listen back. That night, Thalassa sat by herself on the rocks overlooking the bay. The stars flowered quietly above, and in the rhythm of the tide she heard the voices once more, not in her ears but in her breath. She heard Erythra, she heard the forgotten Delian oracle. She heard herself not as she had been, but as she now was, and the shell in her lap swelled once, a final gift, a memory yet to be seen. In her mind, the sky changed. She saw a time yet to come, an era when kids would not ask who controls the sea, but what's it telling us today? An era when silence would be holy once more, an era when each wave bore a memory and someone to listen. She opened her eyes and mouthed a final prayer, greater than asterisk. Not all history is written in stone. Some is sung in water, of course. Let the stillness envelop you like a blanket of starlight. The sea is close by. The story continues. That evening, as the moon climbed full and round over the Aegean, Thalassa dreamed once more. But this dream was different. No cave, no oracle, no voice leading her on gentle riddles. There was light, a golden light down under the sea, shining like an underwater star. And in light of it, a city. It emerged from the seafloor not in destruction, but in splendor. Blinding spires of crystal and marble shone under the waves. Majestic bridges swept across radiant canals. Trees with silver leaves rustled through slow submarine breezes, and at its center a temple, round, flawless, thrumming like a memory that would not be forgotten. Atlantis, not as myth, not as warning, but as a song. Asterisk, she walked its streets in silence. No one was there, no voices, but only the sense that it had ever been alive, and could be again. She rested her hand on a pillar covered in ancient glyphs, and at that moment visions flooded her mind. A group of seers talking not with their lips, but with their minds. Oceans long treated as sacred, not feared, not used up, but as living, and the time of the city's demise, not by flood or conflagration, but by forgetting, not a natural disaster, but of will. The folk had ceased to hear, to the water, to one another, to truth. They constructed walls about their hearts and shrines to their own words. The sea attempted to foretell for them, murmured through the waves, wept through the tempests, but none were heard, until the waves reclaimed it all. Thalassa entered the central temple. Its dome shone like moonlight passed through dark water. At its center was a stone basin, empty, but as she moved closer, water began to swell within it, crystal, clear and glowing, as if taken from the memories of the world. She peered into it, and saw herself, not as she was, but as every girl before her. She was Erythra. She was the child who listened to wind in reeds. She was the dreamer who saw prophecy in seashells. The mother who taught her son to read the sky by the shape of the surf. She was not just one voice, she was many, and the city spoke. Asterisk, the sea does not erase, it remembers, and it waits, greater than for those brave enough to feel. She put the spiral shell in the basin. It hovered on the surface, then drifted down, not heavy, but deliberate, and the water shone more brightly. The dream vanished, but she woke not in her bed. She was standing again at the shore, the actual sea in front of her, the actual moon overhead, the actual world, and yet irrevocably altered. And bobbing just on the line of the tide was the shell, but now it glowed softly blue. It had traveled to Atlantis, and back. She took it up carefully, brought it to her ear, and the voice that she found was not Erythros, not the sea, but her own. Asterisk, I remember, I hear, I speak. After that night, Thalassa was not merely the girl who heard the sea, but the one who returned its voice, and the world changed, slowly, like an incoming tide. The elders dreamed more profoundly, children asked more thoughtful questions, and the waves looked less turbulent, not because the storms had receded, but because someone was hearing. Some say Atlantis did not exist, but Thalassa knew the truth. It wasn't a place, it was presence, a manner of being with the sea, not over it, a manner of hearing memory, not merely history. And in that knowledge, Atlantis came alive, of course. Relax your breathing. Allow your mind to wander like soft froth. The ocean has more stories to share. The morning after, the village awakened to an otherworldly and lovely sound. Not thunder, not breeze, but laughter. Children tore through the tight streets, their pockets overflowing with shells, each one singing quietly, each one radiating heat. The sea had given them something, not treasure, not power, but remembrance. Thalassa sat on the beach, her legs folded under her, the shining shell cradled in her lap. She did not speak, at least, not at first. She just sat there while the tide curled in and out, as silky smooth as silk pulled over old stone. It was no longer merely water to her, it was language. Each ripple, each retreat, each climbing crest was a sentence. And she was teaching herself to read. An old fisherman came up to her, weathered old. His hands were covered with calluses from years of nets being cast. He knelt down next to her, hesitating. I had a dream, he said. My wife, she passed away years ago, but last night I dreamed of her. She was in the surf, laughing. She said the sea forgave me. His voice cracked. I don't even know what for. Thalassa put her hand on his, a gentle touch. You remembered her with love. The sea senses it. It's enough. And he cried, not out of sorrow, but out of relief. More villagers arrived. Some came with questions, some with stories, some with nothing but silence. And in that silence, Thalassa listened. She didn't provide solutions. She didn't pretend to have every answer. She simply heard them. The sea had taught her that to bear witness to someone's truth without judgment was the first form of healing. She went back there that night to the tide pool cave where she had gone as a kid. It was smaller, or perhaps she'd gotten bigger. The scent of salt and warm stone filled the air. Moss blanketed the rocks in soft puffs, and in the middle, the water sparkled, just as it had always sparkled. She sat next to it, the shell resting beside her, and shut her eyes. And the sea, soft and old, spoke to her once more. Greater than asterisk you have remembered, you have shared, but one truth remains. She opened her eyes. The cave was shimmering softly, despite no moonlight reaching it. In the water, the outline of something started to take shape. Not human, not exactly, a presence, female, vast, like the heart of the sea itself. And it smiled. You are not alone, child, it told her. Others have heard before you. Others will hear afterwards. Thalassa touched, fingertips tracing the reflection. But why me? The voice of the sea was a lullaby sung over centuries. Because you asked why, rather than how. Greater than, you inquired to know, not to employ. You approached to hear, not to steal. Tears rolled down her face, not because she was sad, but from a feeling too big to contain a sort of ancient happiness, a reunion of soul and source. The presence moved in close and breathed. Greater than asterisk, Atlantis lives, wherever someone remembers. Asterisk, the vision disappeared. The cave darkened, but the water still felt warm. She touched the shell once more, and for the first time it sang, not in words, not in prophecy, but in harmony. A soft, infinite chord, the sound of being known. When she went outside, the stars were heavy above her, and one by one they started to fall, not in flames, but in light, little comets etching wishes across the darkness. The villagers stood quiet, as if the heavens were responding to something they had not had the courage to ask, gazed up, and breathed into the wind. Greater than I will never stop listening. The sea, with its soft voice, replied, neither will I. Of course, let it all go for now. The thinking, the burden, the day behind you, float with me through the final chapter. Seasons came and went. The island itself did not change in large ways. No temples were constructed. No monument pierced the sky. But something deeper had changed, something quiet and lasting. Folks strolled slower. They listened more. Fishermen resumed singing as they cast nets. Children carried their dreams with them into the tide pools, talking aloud as though someone was present because someone was. Even the elderly, who had been too weary for tales, started to tell old stories once more, blending memory with legend. And at the heart of it all stood Thalassa. She never said she was a priestess, never dressed in robes or assumed a title. But when folks didn't know what to do, they went to her, not for answers, but to be heard. She spent her days walking the beach barefoot, humming at the sea, whispering to the wind. She'd press her ear to the shell and listen sometimes. When questioned what she heard, she'd smile and say, greater than just the world remembering itself. One night, a boat came from the mainland, sleek, foreign, full of strangers in shiny sandals, scholars. They had heard rumors of a girl who could talk to the sea, and they came not in awe, but with instruments and scrolls. We'd like to learn from you, one of them said. Write down your techniques. Thalassa kept quiet. We can take you to Athens. You'd be well known, safe. Your gifts could benefit the world. Still, she only looked toward the waves. You've found something, another said, more softly. Something old. Something we've forgotten. She finally turned. I didn't find it, she said. I remembered it. They stayed for 3 days. Tried to measure things that couldn't be measured. Asked questions whose answers could not be written. And eventually they left, puzzled, skeptical, but somehow gentler than when they'd come. One of them left behind a journal before their ship left. It was inside. There was a note. Some things must be felt, not studied. Thank you for letting us feel. Years passed like the tide. The sea never ceased whispering, and Thalassa never ceased listening. But time, even tempered by the sea, still passes. Her hair silvered, her steps grew slower, but her eyes never grew dim. That ocean deep blue that witnessed the world's grief and its radiant hope. She sat once more in the cave one day. The shell lay in her hands, smooth from a lifetime of grasping. The tide swirled by the stone floor like a mother singing her child to sleep. She closed her eyes and dreamed for the final time. She was young again. She ran barefoot along the cliffs. The wind enmeshed her hair, the salt greeted her cheeks, and beneath her the sea lay vast and inviting. Erythra stood at the cliffs, Edge, the dream oracle, immutable, ageless. She extended her hand. Ready? She asked. Thalassa nodded. They walked forward, hand in hand. After all, not into the sea, into the story. Waves lifted, not to engulf, but to bear. And the stars in the sky bent down, as though to see a soul come home. In the village, a child discovered the shell. It lay upon the sand, glowing softly, singing a soft, endless note. She held it to her ear and smiled. I hear her, she said. And so it started anew, not as an end, but as a tide, because truth, true truth, does not disappear. It flows, it listens, it comes back.